Back live with you tonight in Focus, and thanks for staying on. More than 800,000 workers affiliated to three of the country's largest public service unions may join this civil service wage protest. Details of a planned mass action are beginning to emerge, and they are expected to be announced further, maybe at least tomorrow. Well, the members are from trade union federations Saftu and Saftu, as well as workers union Fedusa. Healthcare workers, police and prison officials are among key category workers who may embark on a strike. Joining us now to explain the program of action is Trevor, Shaku, who speaks for the South African Federation of Trade Unions. Trevor, good to have you with us in the studio, and thank you very much for your time. Firstly, let's get confirmation. Are you, as three federations together, mobilizing for strike action?
Yes, it's three federations. It's ourselves, Saftu, Saftu and Fedusa. There are about 2 or 3 unions in the public service who are not part of the coordination, but most of the unions coming from Saftu, also from Fedusa and Saftu are also in the coordination. And these are mainly those about 7 to 8 unions who are organizing in the public service.
Yeah. There are 2 things that, as Saftu particularly, you are perturbed about. One is the fact that the minister has said in order to implement the austerity measures, some retrenchments might have to be effected. But 2, government has said these words: there is nothing to respond to. This is government's final 3% offer, and they are implementing it starting Thursday.
We have voiced our differences with what Minister Godongwana would have said in relation to the demand of 10%, because he's saying that they might have to consider retrenchments. And we have a serious problem with this. At the beginning of the negotiations, we put in the Public Service Coordinating Bargaining Council, when we were presenting and responding to the economic and fiscal outlook, we pointed out that there's a need not only to increase the wages of workers, but to expand the public sector wage bill, which means that we are going to be able to afford to hire more public service workers in education, in health and that. And all of these things, we are advocating for them because workers are, institutions, public institutions in particular, are understaffed, and this understaffing contributes to a number of problems. One is that which immediately affects workers. This is understaffing. It results in work overload for our workers. But secondly, it also affects the very beneficiaries of public services. These are your more than 80% of the population in this country who rely on public schools, public health care, police, correctional service, traffic, social work. All of these people are looking for government to give them these services, but if government does not hire more workers, you're going to find long queues in hospitals, you're going to find long queues in traffic offices. And this is the reason why we're having such a particular problem. Not long ago, Thabo, what happened in, I think, Bakersford, was a lady who gave birth in front of a clinic gate. A nurse who, by a security guard. Yes. Yeah. A nurse who arrived early was actually vilified that, from a moral point of view, was vilified that you are evil. Why are you not assisting this particular lady who is giving birth at that particular gate? The lady argued that my starting time is not now. I'll open at the time when the working hour starts. People would have lashed at that particular worker. But the reality of the matter, which our people must understand, is that the reason why these clinics and hospitals are not working 24 hours, some of them, is because of understaffing in the public service. So a reduction in the headcount is as a result of the shrinking public sector wage bill, which has been happening for quite some time now. And you're continuing to have this problem. In 1994, when we took government, or when ANC rather, not me, when ANC took government, it actually inherited a higher public service worker role. But at the current moment, there's been a decline. About 34,000 of workers have the total role of the public service workers has declined by 34,000. At a time when the population of the country has grown by about 20 million, because in 1994 we were 40 million, today we are about 60 million and more. Now, it shows you that at the time when population grows, demand for public service grows, we are shrinking in terms of numbers of those public services. And we reject what Godongwan is actually proposing there by actually proposing and threatening the public service workers and unions that they will retrench if we do not back down on our demands.
Yeah. And you're saying irrespective of the fact that they are unilaterally implementing this 3% wage increase, workers must reject it.
Workers must reject it. And I think the principals tomorrow will give a more detailed plan of what should happen in the future. But indeed, the position is that workers must reject this. We cannot allow government to get away with this on two levels. One, it's the question around the rising cost of living and what workers are getting vis-à-vis inflation and interest rate hikes. At the same time, you also must look at the very institution of collective bargaining because it's under threat. In 2020, they challenged it. They reneged out of the collective agreement of 2018, a multi-term agreement, which was supposed to be ending 2020-2021. So they reneged out of that. Workers could not get any increase. And as far as that is concerned, you realize that workers in the past 3 years have actually not had any real gains. If you were to compare it, they've actually lost 9.8% increases in real terms. Now, if you look at collective bargaining, which is under threat at this current moment, we ought to challenge government. Because if we allow government to undermine collective bargaining, where when we struck agreements, it is unilaterally coming out of those particular agreements, it actually, if it goes to unilaterally implement some of things which have not been agreed because it can invoke Section 5.5 of the Public Service Act, we should reject that because it will also be a very bad precedent for the private sector who actually get away with a lot of harm for our workers.
Are you worried that if you do not push ahead with this demand that labor in particular will become an irrelevant force, particularly when it comes to these issues that you would like to change?
The labor wouldn't at any point, especially in the context of exploitation that we experience. For as long as we are living under capitalism, which premises itself on the production of commodities for extraction of profits, there would always be conditions of exploitation. And trade unions and the labor in particular would not be irrelevant because their role first and foremost is to ensure that they fight for the conditions of workers. In this instance, we ought to ensure that we demonstrate. Indeed, we've been battered in the past few years where we've taken serious beatings from the employers themselves. And we've got to regain ourselves. We're licking our wounds. And the lion that is the labor movement must begin to wake up so that it can take battles that matter most. And these are battles around conditions of employment, but also including wage increases.
There's some who argue that a strike at this point will, one, only go to exacerbate job insecurity, in the sense that we've got high inflation, we've got interest rates that are rising, we've got companies that are closing down, we've got energy inefficiencies in the country, we've got the war in the Ukraine, supply chains have been messed up, we're coming out of COVID. All these things make for a bad economic climate.
We think what makes a bad for economic climate is capitalism itself, not these other elements which unfold in the course of our lives. The first point we must make is that capitalists were not going to even make any employment for as long as, because for them, unemployment also allows them to be able to reap more profits, because when they do retrenchments, bring more machinization, remember theirs is to accumulate such particular profits. So in that instance, they will always create conditions for further unemployment. And you see it even in the implementation of the strategies which the Reserve Bank is adopting. When Khanya was addressing the Vet School of Governance 2 weeks ago, he actually mentioned that the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment in this country has gone up, meaning that we have employment that is accelerating inflation. And as a result, they are tightening screws of monetary policy, increasing interest rates so that they can induce unemployment and fight inflation by that. Because for them, to fight inflation, you always have to look at the demand side. And looking at the demand side means that there's a lot of money in the pockets of people who are buying. Therefore, you are going to have to reduce that, because by reducing that money, you are reducing aggregate demand, and therefore you'll be fighting inflation in that instance. So Khanyago is even using this. So unemployment is a product, first and foremost, of capitalist accumulation methods, profiteering, but secondly, it is used by the monetary policy strategists who are using it to fight inflation, who are using it as a target for inflation. So you are having such problems, and for us, the problems do not lie with inflation, but lie with the capitalists themselves, because inflation is their result. We think you can fight inflation in a very different way. Instead of increasing interest rate hikes, which will induce defaults, bankruptcies of small businesses, leading them to retrench workers, you can actually expand production, make sure that there is more supply, more production that takes place, because more production of those particular goods would ensure that there is a lot which money could not finish and push the general rise in the prices of those particular goods and services. So we have a different method to which the neoliberal monetarists are using at the current moment.
Now, the Minister, of course, has denied your claims that this is a self-imposed restriction that is suggested by the IMF and the World Bank. He says we are in a serious cash crunch as the state. And there are others who are saying we are only going to dig ourselves in deeper if we continue, for example, to borrow to pay things like social grants, et cetera, for consumption. It's just not sustainable.
Again, it's the monetarist view, which originates from neoliberalism. There are different kinds of methods through which we will interpret. But first, let's show that it is indeed IMF and the World Bank that are dictating, or suggesting rather, to Khanyago that he must follow this particular path. In 2018, they published a document called An Incomplete Transition, in which they suggested that the fiscal sustainability of this country is at risk, and therefore Khanyago would have to tighten the screws, not Khanyago rather, the Treasury will have to tighten the screws of fiscal policy. And as a result, they suggested what they call fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation, in short, means that they must reduce government expenditure on public goods and service provision, right? After suggesting that, they went further in 2019 to publish another document called In Creating Markets. They again suggested that there should be fiscal consolidation. If you look at Country Partnership Framework of 2021 published in July by the World Bank, you'll also see there that they're encouraging again fiscal consolidation. And they target in that very document the public sector wage bill as one of the areas in which they must tighten the screws of fiscal policy. But again, you look at the report from IMF in 2022, in the opening, in the very introduction, the executive summary of the directors, it says that we are recommending that there should be fiscal consolidation. So Khanyago is indeed implementing this, not Khanyago man, Enoch Godongwan is implementing these particular policies because they have been recommended by these financial institutions of capitalism, World Bank and the IMF. So he must not come to the South Africans and lie. In fact, what he's trying to do at the current moment is to fulfill what those financiers at the World Bank and the IMF are suggesting, as opposed to the people who elected them into that government, because we are the ones who elected them into that government. They are ignoring us by taking the very views of those neoliberal institutions. We have a very serious problem with Enoch Godongwa and the entire government, of course, also because it is following that particular path. If you look at all other areas moving away from fiscal and even monetary policies, and you go into the rest of the macroeconomy, you'll realize that indeed they're following a neoliberal path of underdevelopment. It's not development, it's underdevelopment. Because what you see in this country has been underdevelopment since 1994, and it continues to be that. So we do not think that there's no fiscal space that can help government to ensure that it funds the demands around public sector wage bill, around the grants. By the way, a while ago in your program, I mentioned that South Africa is a sovereign monetary system, which means that it has its central bank which can issue the South African currency. Yeah. It cannot fail to meet its spending obligations which are denominated in the South African currency. Why would it fail? For instance, the problem would have been if, for instance, we needed to procure things from outside because we would need to accumulate a number of dollar reserves in order to be able to do that. So there might be a complication for us to do that. But you can be able to spend domestically.
It was argued that it's a ridiculous thing that you must just print money willy-nilly if we want to spend in the country. But we'll bring you back for that debate some other day. Much appreciated, and thank you for your time and coming through today. Trevor Shaku speaks on behalf of Saftu, the spokesperson, confirming for us this evening that indeed, as the three federation unions in the country, they will be announced